Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? Everybody would kind of gather in. Thank you all for coming on this beautiful day. We have just a little bit of competition going on in town with a great Saturday market, gorgeous weather, a big-time track meet, but nothing's bigger than this show, so we're glad you're all here. Thank you very much. Before we get going, I just wanted to say a word of thanks to Karen and to Tina for this magnificent venue this gallery has been for this show and for so many shows we've had here over the years. This is the 8th David McCosh show we've done. 8 shows by David McCosh in 12 years has it been, Karen? That's remarkable. That's more David McCosh than happened during his entire lifetime. So we're doing very well for him here. Each show has had a theme that's tried to develop an understanding of his work, an essay, an integrated hanging of the paintings. We've had these special events. There are very few galleries that I know of that could or would put something like this on. So Karen and Tina, thank you very, very much. This gallery very much deserves your support. It's one of the great resources we have in the arts in Oregon, not just Eugene. So very special day today. 2 remarkable painters will be talking about their work, about David McCosh, about landscape painting in general, and about some of the other painters at this show who have influenced them and whose work is part of this school that we've talked about in this connection. First, Peg Coe, one of Oregon's truly great landscape painters, and one of Oregon's truly great painters, period. So pleased to have her as part of the show. When Elaine and I came to Eugene almost 40 years ago, you were the first painter we noticed. We saw some of your work here and we thought, wow, this is a special place to have a painter like this here.
I'm honored.
Well, we're honored to have had your work as part of our experience living here all these years. When we think of David McCosh, we think of paintings that are carefully structured, balanced, beautifully organized, good color that's analytical and expressive. But for me, the most important characteristic of McCosh, his greatest distinction, is the sensuous response he has to the landscape. He really sees the landscape with all of his senses. And for me, the painter who is closest to that in this group, and any group that I know of, is Peg. She also has this extraordinary sensuous response to the landscape. You can hear the water in these streams behind us that she's painted. It's just very visceral, very meaningful. And she'll be talking about what the experience of McCosh was like as a teacher and how it led maybe to this incredible organic style of painting that she has evolved, with the beautiful linear quality that it has, the very expressive use of color to create relationships. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And then after Peg, we'll have Bets Cole. And Bets is, I'm really glad that she's a part of this show, because Bets's landscape painting is as good as it gets around here. I've really been impressed with it over the years. I've enjoyed seeing it in many contexts. And she has had a special relationship with Nelson Sandberg. Nelson, one of McCosh's students, but also a contemporary in many respects, a colleague, and Betts painted extensively with Nelson. So we'll see how this characteristic of painting that McCosh started out has transferred through his students, which we've already heard from, and now to Betts, who's kind of one step removed. If McCosh really got something going here, it's going to survive through the generations. So we'll hear about that from Betts today. So we'll begin with Peg. She'll speak, and then we'll introduce Betts, and she will speak. Please ask questions, have conversation during the during the talks. I'm sure both Peg and Bets would appreciate that. So Peg, welcome.
Thank you very much, Roger, for that touching introduction. I want to pretty much talk about what it was like to be a McCosh student and what it was that he did. I found myself talking to the camera, pardon. But anyway, first of all, I think the observation that I've made since being a student, in later years being more around his work and things, is what an integrated course of study he designed for us at the university, and how he continued developing and building upon the very foundation of the ideas that he taught us in his own work. The reason this was so surprising to me is back when I was a student, none of us knew what any of our instructors, what their artwork was like at all. And David was very much the teacher, but he didn't paint in class, or we didn't see his paintings around. So we just kind of went in and did the class without necessarily knowing why we were doing it. but anyway, what I've thought about when I think about his whole program being an integrated system is that in taking his advanced drawing class, his advanced painting class, his watercolor class, and even one term of lithography, is that they all are about the same sort of thing, or carry on the same basic ideas, which are which I think are kind of the heart of this inquiry that he taught with painting and drawing, is observation and self-correction. I just say those are themes that carry out through his work and through the way he taught, specifically, I think also in his work. But I'll start with his drawing class, because a student was not allowed to take his watercolor class. You couldn't get admitted in it, nor his advanced painting class if you didn't have his extensive and I would say very disciplined drawing classes. And these classes are different from drawing classes that I see now. They have some similarities, of course, but people are more likely to experiment with more materials and try different things during the term of drawing class. And now it's more popular to do a little collage on it, or have different things. But with Kosh, we had extremely simple tools. We had vine charcoal, so this is stick charcoal. It's very soft, not greasy like the other kind of charcoal. And we had bond paper, very sort of basic paper. We had a chamois rag, which you could use to sort of soften up something that it wasn't working out. No eraser. And we had a string about this size. And that was standard equipment for his drawing class. The approach to the drawing was all about improving your skills. It really was not about expressing yourself. It was improving your ability to observe and actually record accurately what was in front of you. And this was done not with theory. It was done with this simple technique of using the string, or just sometimes you could eyeball it, but you could check yourself with the string, the relationship between 2 points that you've observed in space, and making not a curved line, but a straight line that indicates that one observation. And then you do a network of those straight lines as you continue to draw. And they're, you don't polish them off or anything. The whole drawing are these lines that are examining form. So that one thing that students learn right away is if you see a beautiful curved line of the thigh or arm or something, you don't make this curved line. And that's because when you just make a generalized curved line, you get a generalized answer. And you use these broken lines to actually decipher the form, just exactly the nature of that curve, even at the bottom of a neck. It's a precise kind of a curve, and you get it by observation and trial and error. You started with the charcoal, you started soft, and probably one of the most important things that I need to mention is that you picked up the charcoal just like you would pick up a small rock, and you drew with your full arm. And that absolutely no one was allowed to hold it like a pencil, because with a pencil, you don't get these free sweeping observations and energy that you get with your full arm. You get smaller, tighter, kind of constrictive shapes and things, and that impacts your observation. So that was a given that you're going to, draw with using the full arm. Well, the thing which, when you went on to painting, some things about drawing are very much part of his painting course, and what line has a lively role in his painting class, as it does in paintings that you will observe, is that he worked with line throughout. In fact, at the beginning, if you were just trying to block in what you were painting, it was the most light line that you could, so that it could be changed easily. But you usually ended up with lines at the very end of the painting, because line has the dynamic ability to pull together, make sense out of masses of color. And so that was going on all the time with the drawing and with the painting. And seems like I was going to say something else about the painting. I followed with drawing, but I can't remember what it was. So, I know what it was. What else paralleled this approach to kind of chipping away at an image rather than making a bold statement about what you think it is, was also parallel to the way that he used color patches. So that you did not, just as you didn't make a rash statement about the curve of an arm or something, you also did not make a rash statement about the color of someone's shirt or the face or anything. What you did is you started observing patches of color in some particular point within your vision. You picked out patches of color, the sensations that you got, and you started putting them on the canvas much like a constellation. They really are open. They haven't kind of been drawn into specific forms, even if you might have a light drawing under. The other thing is that you started with a turpentine and pigment to use it in a more transparent way. So the patches were transparent at first. You worked from thin to thick, but you also held off on your opaques and whites until kind of like a second layer of the painting. And this allowed for extremely rich color, so that your painting was likely much more richly colored than the still life or the model or whatever you're painting. So that was a part of that. But one thing that I thought about, in addition to just this process, just accepting this process as an interesting way of painting, is that it was very much about when you don't have your colors tied up into a very tight design, and you have a patch of color here and a patch of color there, you can really see, what the relationship between them are. And so one of the reasons that's important is that one of the things that he taught, in addition to observation of the subject by the use of drawing or painting, was the importance, the critical importance of observing your painting. So what he said, and I will quote, is look at what you're doing when you're doing it. And that may sound obvious, like, well, we're not looking away, but the thing about it is that type of thinking, that type of working and being in the moment to see what is happening has a huge impact on how people paint, and it changes a painting decidedly from some early decision that the shirt's red, this is blue. And what that is that you, and this happened, he talked about this, and I found this to be absolutely true, is that he always had you mix color with a painting knife while you were working with the paint color. But you mix a color, you think it's going to be for your shirt or something, and you mix it up and you hold it to the canvas. And very often, if you're really tuned in, like a Ouija board, something makes you put a patch of color in the background. It seems almost magical, but I think it's because, to me, it seems like once you have some color on that canvas, it's alive. And that it has its needs, or it sort of is leading, it's ahead of you in the design, kind of, And so, over the years, this is one of the things that has had the greatest impact on the way I teach, is that I always go, if I'm starting to do something, and then I get the slightest impulse, the Ouija board impulse, then I will go with that. I mean, it's just no matter what, I'll go with that. I won't run it through my head. And that's, as a poet said, that made all the difference in the world. So anyway, I did want to touch upon his, the actual class projects he had. And I just heard from John Cruzen that he actually has copies of some of the old problems, because there are really a lot of them. But a couple of things, or three projects actually, were always part of a class. The first one is color mixing. And first I must say that you were given a Makash palette, and those were the colors you brought into class. And you'd say, oh, I have some, no. You brought in a Makash palette. That consisted of what we call Windsor violet, which is kind of an ultramarine violet, but it was a particularly clear one. It seems like it's a little more intense to me than the ultramarine violets that maybe if you had ultramarine violet with a little bit of dioxide purple, it'd be about right. But you had that. You had viridian green, burnt umber, alizarin crimson, yellow ochre, cadmium yellow light, Mars violet, and white. That was it, no black. Well, so one of your first problems is a color mixing chart. And the color mixing chart, you put the 7 hues down one side like a crossword puzzle, and also along this way. And then, so as you filled in all the squares, which you didn't fill in, you left a little border around them, not that that's important, but it is, is that you saw the mixture with white of every color with every other color on the palette. And this was a revolution that he really enjoyed, because people were always surprised that you mix violet and green to get blue, which is supposed to be a primary color. Nature doesn't always follow theory. So another one was that alizarin crimson, which is a cool, almost red-violet red, mixed with cadmium yellow light, made a true red, a pure red, or what we tend to think of as red when we think of red. Those were a couple of things. There were other discoveries too, but those were the fun ones that people thought, how can secondary colors make a primary color? So that's fun. But then after that, you did a value chart, which was to take each of the 7 colors, mixing it with white as needed, to create 7 equal steps of value from a 1, which is just a tinted kind of a color, very lightly tinted color, to a 7, which was as dark as you could get, still adding white. So it wasn't the full darkness of, say, what I would call an 8. So you did this row of color, and you'd be surprised how difficult that is, because you have to, the step from 1 to 2 has to be the same level of a jump as the step from 2 to 3 and 2 to 4. You can't have, it's not like a musical system. You can't skip steps, so you had to be able to do that equally. And then the next color you mixed had to, when you did the 7 patches of color, it had to be consistent in value with the color line above it. And in the case of the two colors, cadmium yellow light and yellow ochre, which never do get to a 5, 6, or 7 value because they're inherently, the pigment is in fact a lighter value, you added burnt umber to those because he didn't want you to change the hue. He just wanted, and that's a warm dark. So he actually considered burnt umber a yellow, just the extreme end of yellow. And so that was done. And so we can't, to this day, you see a color, it's, oh, that's a number 4, that's a number 5 or something. It really trains your eye. And let's see, the third one is specific to the Makash way of painting. It's not the only one. Post-Impressionists have painted this way, but it has to do with dealing with color, with masses, local color, objects, as an optical mix of color. So it's like a mass of color created by patches of color that are not all the same, but the impact of them within the context of the whole composition is light or cool or dark or bright. So it has a role to play, but the actual patches, the area that's filled with the patches of color, does not intend to fool your eye that it's the exact replica of a blouse or some object in the world. You used observation in a way. This was not an unlikely position to be in. You know, when you're comparing a couple of colors, to actually isolate the other colors, and maybe you're looking on a wall or something and seeing how the color differs from one side to the other. And one of his other Makash-isms was saying it's a different thing to paint a wall. How to put it? To paint a wall is different than painting a picture of a wall. So that was it's sort of obvious, but it's not obvious because people, you know, they don't always think of the world as this sort of sensation of vibrating little particles of color that. Which is, of course, what it is. And so, saying that, I think that's the main points I wanted to say about his class. I did take the time when Mark and I and some other painters got together at a painter's home and ended up painting for the model. That was the plan. We spent 3 days, 2 nights or something, and painted for the model. And I chose, since I had this coming up, and I thought, I don't have any examples of what a Makash student painting would be. So I got as close as I could to the kind of painting I would have done in Makash's class. So I want to share that. So you see the method. It's kind of one day's work, but it's that's just really a lot like a Makash student work would look like. So before I close my part of the program, I just wonder if there's any questions, comments.
Well, you're standing right in front of an excellent example of line.
Yeah.
And when you said the minute color gets onto a canvas, it comes alive, some people may say there's lots of color on that canvas,
Yes.
but it's very much alive simply because of the juxtaposition of line. It seems almost organic and moves really as you look at it.
Yes, I want to. There's so many fun quotes that I think are really accurate from Makash, and one of them had to do with the mixture of line work and painting. And he would talk up in a watercolor about these two patches of color, and then talk about the quality of the line work. And he said, and he referred to that several times, but he wasn't teaching a kind of line work. Don't get me wrong. He just was aware that the difference between the line work made a lot of difference. So what he said is the final line work makes the difference between a $50 painting and a $500 painting. So that, you know, you tend to remember those kinds of things. Any other thoughts? Yes.
Did the color palettes stay the same between oil and watercolor?
It's similar, not the exact same. Now I think between talking to John and Mark and sort of memory is that he had one palette that he offered that was 5 colors, and we think there was another palette that down the line where he offered 6 or 7. And the 5, he used a color that you don't see on the market anymore. You see sepia, but this was warm sepia, so it was just a richer sepia. That was your color you darkened a lot of things with. You had Windsor violet, Windsor green, Windsor red, and I'm thinking it was cadmium yellow light. Now for that 5-part palette, I'm trying to remember if he ever used Mars violet. I see it in his watercolors, but I don't recall whether we had that in it or not. But he liked the Mars violet. I think part of it was, as someone who'd taken a class from him said, you can't paint the Oregon landscape in the winter unless you have Mars violet. So that's part of it. But part of it is that it's such a sort of a metallic-like dark red that it actually kind of stands apart from painting, so that when you put it on, you notice it. It's actually line, because I think that separation of line work to oil and the integration of that is crucial ground, very interesting ground. And besides David McCosh, you've all seen Paul Cézanne's work, and I think to me, Jacques Ometi's work, if you really look at it, goes even further in terms of really expressing a line, and where the line and the paint gets kind of worked in layers, but it's terribly integrated. And any other questions?
Where do you see your own work going?
The hell no. No, it's just that I think in a way I patterned my life out of this painting process where, and I'll quote David McCosh again, it's not where it's not what you're looking for, it's what you find. And that really cuts to the chase of not having these ideas about what would be the thing to do or the great, or something, but actually responding, just like you responded to that color on the canvas. Respond to what's happening in your own painting and even in your own life, and go with that if that seems to be exciting. And I just go kind of it's a seat of the pants thing, and so I absolutely do not plan. In fact, a couple of times a year or two ago, I was invited to do retrospectives in towns, very, very nice venues. But the idea of looking at my life is sort of complete enough to do a retrospective is not where I want to put my energy, is that I want to be able to go, if I get excited about something presents itself, I just go with that and don't look back. But I do think I will have to say that I have been touched by this show, by the fact that sort of the very design of the show by Roger is connecting we who have studied with Dave McCosh with his body of work. So one of the things that I have been thinking, and probably if I say it I won't do it, but is not just relying on what you learned when you were a student, but what we find at looking at his work well after the time we're students, is that he put out a lot of new propositions, and to actually respond in drawing and painting to this body of work and to this concept of pushing, looking that this is not just a launching pad for your painting, but a launching pad that you could sort of continue to be mentored by Dave McCosh. So that's of interest to me, but I don't like to talk about it because I don't like to talk about things that I haven't done yet. But anyway, any other thoughts, questions? Okay, it's my pleasure to turn this over to the wonderful Betsy Cole.
Interesting to hear Peg
because a lot of the things that I have written down so parallel or even reiterate what she said. And the first on my list was that I admire, and I am in full agreement with Roger, that with his statement that there is an Oregon School of Landscape Painters. And bravo to that. It is not just the 6 of us, it's all of the painters that are painting now with the knowledge that we've learned from each other. Makash was the springboard, and we all jumped. So, look around the room at the paintings, and there's a bit of Makash in all of us. And a good thing to do is even take one of the artists and go to the painting and say, what is it about this painting that is reflecting Makash's influence? That's just such a great way to look at a painting, to have a conversation with the artists themselves. As with the group of 7 from Canada or the Society of 6 from California, we as a group have found inspiration from the same source material. I headed west after schooling in upstate New York at Cornell, where I was first introduced to watercolor. But it wasn't until I hit the Pacific Northwest that I felt the urge to capture the essence of the landscape. Nelson Sangren was the person who catapulted me into the landscape. Nelson once said, "We are all touched by the same light. We all cast the same shadows. Some of us see these, some of us never do." I learned to paint the landscape by painting alongside Nelson, not in a classroom. It was the landscape itself that taught me how to paint the landscape. And that is a big learning curve. And it took me many, 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 many years. And as you all know, painting isn't easy. Nelson taught painting as a philosophy. It was not just a job, but a way of life. I erased my preconceived ideas about comfort. I found passion and focus could carry me through wind and rain. I learned that I preferred to stand while painting. Nelson always sat. I learned what I wanted to do and what somebody else did, and that it all worked. You know, it was just our own styles. Nelson was always painting, and whenever he saw me, he asked me if I had been painting. Not in general, but that day. He encouraged me, but he did not judge. I learned that it was not only I who felt that painting was a humbling experience. It's never ending. Nelson encouraged me to trust my intuition. And I think that comes from Makash. Knowing that you are the chooser. That the painting and you have a relationship. And that you need to listen to each other. So Nelson painted with me. We talked to Makash. We painted. We talked to Makash. We painted. We talked line, value, shape. We painted. We composed. And we composed paintings with intention. So what we talked about is how you divide your space. So when I started painting, I always start with crosshairs. It's a big cross in the middle of my paper or my canvas. And as you look around, you'll see that, like, let's take this Makash painting next to Peg. It's divided in threes, the main segments, whereas then the upper top, you could divide it in the partway down the middle. This of the coastal area, leaving one long line at the horizon and then the rest to support that statement up there. That place up there is your rest area, and then all this other line work and activity is talking about that part and how it's supporting it and how it's working it. I understood that McCosh painted with freshness. He always developed his paintings in a personal way. Nelson never said much to me. He made fun of me a lot, but always was there to paint with me. Slowly, I developed my own sense of power. As you look around the room, you see different styles and interpretations. You see many mediums. However, we are all thinking about Oregon, its value, its light, and its color. So let's take a look at Craig Cheshire's here. And the shapes, unlike McCosh's, are caricatures. They are characters. They're very simplified shapes of color, skillfully stacked through the picture plane, and they are skillfully placed to create a real dynamic painting. Peg's are softer, but as dynamic and as exciting. So different. We could be standing next to each other, looking at the same subject matter, coming from the same place, but have totally different paintings. I, like McCosh, lay in patches of color and value from back to front and then front to back in the picture plane. So I start thinking about what's in the background and what's not in front of me. So I really consider that first. And then what comes next towards you all. And then I think, okay, let's go back the other direction. So I don't know if McCosh thought that way, but the way that I look at McCosh, I think, oh yeah, he was thinking just like me. But who knows? Okay, so color patches, and then I use the line to sort of whip it together. I make a statement about the shape with my line. So let's talk about line. There's many kinds of line. There's lines that play hide and seek, and a line that just is really in your face. Okay, Nelson loved the in your face line. He just loaded up his brush with juicy color and put that line down. I always had to sort of tiptoe into it and then just attack. Okay, McCosh used it consistently, not much variation in width, but smaller in width as compared to Nelson. And you can see that watercolor around that wall too has large, large lines. McCosh had a lot of variation in motion in his line work. John's beautiful big painting right there, my gosh, there is such movement and vitality in all three of those panels. It's just like, yeah, I mean, look at how line can work with you and for you, and McCosh showed me that. I use line, I use the charcoal in my painting a lot. I go in and out of drawing and painting because I really trust my drawing. I trust my drawing so that I hang the paint on the drawing rather than the line on the paint, like Craig. Okay. McCosh insisted that a painter paints to see, but to see a painter must observe. Nelson passed on McCosh's wisdom, intensity, and curiosity about the landscape to me. I have become deeply invested in the landscape. I am not me without it. As you see, all of our styles are unique, but very much related. When I travel to other places in the country, even abroad, I see that my approach and my palette is very, very different from the painters of those areas. I think we just have a different rhythm. I began my exploration of the landscape McCosh style. We come from the same hood. We all have Oregon in our painting blood. So it's a beautiful day. Go out and paint. Thank you.
Well, you described painting with Nelson Sandgren, and I guess it was a month ago, Mark was talking about that too, and he said it wasn't a marathon session, that they'd paint for maybe 2 hours, and then there would be a very long coffee break. What I would like to know is what happened during those coffee breaks?
Well, I can tell you what happened on my coffee breaks, but Mark's got his own stories about his coffee breaks and many other people.
Well, did you talk about painting?
We talked about painting.
Oh.
Yeah, we talked about
this.
But Nelson he sort of didn't have an agenda. I think he had an agenda, but he didn't tell me about his agenda. We had a relationship where he'd say these little things and I'd go, oh my God, I really need to think about that. So it would just take over my thinking, and it would be like, I could lend you a bigger brush. I could take up a collection for you so that you could buy another color of paint. There was some sarcasm there, but there was always some little insight into what I was doing. And I was a very, very timid painter. And it just took a while for me to get my chops on, and it's time. And like Mark and Nelson and McCosh, they are the driftwood kings. And they just whip their paintbrushes around those forms of the driftwood, and they can create such movement through the painting, through those driftwood shapes. And my driftwood always sort of just went, and what I got is that I was never going to be a driftwood queen. But I could use the sand, and I could use the branches, and I could use those upward thrusts of the Douglas firs. And that could create movement in my painting. Look at McCosh over here, these little, on the right-hand side in those darker areas, those verticals of those skinny trees are, man, that's a really important part of that painting. And it's so different from the rest of the painting. The painting's sort of just talking about that little alley through the woods there, and then that round S curve that goes through the forest here with that line and the light of the paper, and then Peg's. If you look at the cloud on this first painting of Peg's, I've just looked at this. It's just like that cloud on the top starts with the yellow, and then it just follows down that lovely light, almost white top of the headland there, and then down the cliff in the front, and then it goes back through the water and then up again, and then it's just like, wow, just moving us around the painting and just telling us all about that gurgling water and those massive forms and the lovely color, and that's what I got out of Makash. That's what I'm getting out of my contemporaries. It's just like, wow, what a gift, and hopefully I can do that for somebody else.
Thanks, Vince. Thanks, Peg. Today's the closing of the show, so we have a little reception. Please participate. We may have a special performance by Eugene's new bluegrass band, the Driftwood Kings.
Do you mean Mark has his accordion?
Oh, that.
And
I missed that. Go on, did you do that again?